My name is James, and for over 15 years I believed that my marriage with Karen was built on unwavering trust, shared dreams, and mutual respect. We had weathered many storms together, always emerging stronger from every challenge. I never imagined that one seemingly ordinary weekend would shatter my sense of security entirely. It all began on a Friday afternoon when Karen announced that she and her friends were heading out of town for a girls' getaway. I nodded in agreement, fully confident that our marriage could endure a few days apart. After all, I had complete trust in her and in our relationship. That Friday evening, I sat alone in our quiet home, waiting for Karen's return. As dusk turned into night, my phone remained silent, and the hours stretched on with an unnerving stillness. I tried calling her, but every attempt went unanswered. At first, I chalked it up to a bad signal or perhaps an extended night out with her friends. However, as the night deepened, a slow dread began to seep into my mind. It wasn't until Saturday morning that the truth revealed itself in a way I could never have imagined. I woke to a series of frantic missed calls and messages from mutual friends. Karen's texts were laced with laughter and teasing, suggesting that I had been left behind as part of an elaborate prank. My heart sank as I pieced together the horrifying reality. Karen and her friends had intentionally abandoned me in a state I had never visited, far from home, with no explanation or apparent plan to retrieve me. At first, disbelief held me captive. How could the woman I loved participate in such a cruel joke? My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. I scrolled through the messages again and again, the repeated jabs of "let's see how you manage" echoing in my ears. In that moment, I felt utterly betrayed. A mix of anger, humiliation, and profound loneliness took hold. I sat in the silence of a strange motel room, staring at a blank wall and wondering how I had been so blind to the possibility of such treachery. As the shock began to wear off, I realized I had no choice but to face the situation head-on. With only the clothes on my back and a meager sum in my wallet, I set out into the unknown. I didn't know this new state or its customs, and every unfamiliar landmark was a reminder of my abandonment. I felt vulnerable, alone, and incredibly out of place. Yet, somewhere deep within, a small spark of determination ignited. I resolved to find my way back home and, along the journey, understand why the person I trusted most had thought it entertaining to leave me stranded. I began by asking for directions at a small gas station on the outskirts of town. The clerk, a kindly older man, looked at me with pity and offered me a hot cup of coffee, his voice gentle as he asked if I needed help. His simple act of kindness cut through the haze of betrayal and despair, reminding me that not everyone in this strange new place was out to exploit my misfortune. That interaction, though brief, gave me a glimmer of hope, a sense that perhaps I could navigate this unfamiliar territory on my own. Armed with a hastily drawn map and the clerk's friendly advice, I set off on a long, winding road that promised to lead me toward the nearest town. As the landscape changed from suburban sprawl to open fields and rolling hills, I felt a curious mix of isolation and liberation. Every mile traveled was a step away from the betrayal and a move toward a fresh start, a chance to rediscover who I was without the constant safety net of our shared life. The solitude allowed me time to reflect on the fragility of trust and the unpredictability of human relationships. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, while driving through an endless expanse of farmland, memories of our happier times surfaced unbidden. I recalled our first date, the gentle promises exchanged under the starry sky, and the dreams we had woven together in whispered conversations late into the night. It pained me to think that those cherished memories were now overshadowed by a single act of thoughtless cruelty. I questioned everything. Had I taken her for granted? Were there signs that I had overlooked? The anger simmered inside me, but it was tempered by a growing resolve not to let this moment define me. By the time I reached a small town, the reality of my situation had fully sunk in. I checked into a modest motel, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. I knew I had to figure out how to contact someone who could help me get back home. In the meantime, I resolved to document my journey, a way to process the betrayal and perhaps, in time, find a path to forgiveness or closure. Every detail was recorded, the kindness of strangers, the breathtaking beauty of the open road, and the bitter taste of abandonment that lingered in every moment. The day ended with a storm rolling in, its dark clouds mirroring the turmoil inside me. As I lay in the narrow motel bed, listening to the rain drum on the roof, I felt both the weight of betrayal and a strange exhilaration for the unknown path ahead. I had been thrust into a situation that forced me to confront my own limitations, to discover reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. And though Karen's cruel joke had left a gaping wound in our relationship, it had also set me on a journey of self-discovery that I could never have imagined. The storm outside mirrored the chaos in my mind as I embarked on the next leg of my journey. With Karen's messages still echoing in my ears, I resolved to navigate this unfamiliar state on my own terms. I knew that returning home was imperative, yet I also sensed that every mile I traveled would unravel a part of the person I had thought I was, a man defined by reliance on the comfort and familiarity of a long-term marriage. Driving down dusty back roads and through sleepy towns, I began to encounter the true essence of isolation. There were moments when I felt completely alone in a vast, indifferent landscape, a stark contrast to the life I had known. Yet, as the solitude deepened, I found unexpected opportunities to reflect. In the quiet hum of the engine and the rhythmic pulse of the rain, I started to piece together the fragments of my own identity that had been buried under years of routine and complacency. One particularly cold afternoon, I pulled over at a small diner nestled on the edge of a quiet highway. The neon sign buzzed faintly as I stepped inside, and I was greeted by the warm smile of a waitress who took immediate notice of my disheveled state. Over a cup of steaming coffee and a slice of homemade pie, I struck up a conversation with her. She shared stories of life in this part of the country, of struggles and small victories that define the community. Her genuine kindness reminded me that even in moments of profound isolation, humanity could shine through. I realized that every person I encountered had a story, and in their stories, I began to find fragments of my own lost spirit. As I continued my journey, I took the time to explore the natural beauty that unfolded before me. I stopped at scenic overlooks, where the land stretched out in undulating fields and the sky seemed impossibly vast. In those moments of quiet reflection, I felt a slow but steady shift within me, a softening of the raw anger that had once consumed me. I began to understand that while Karen's prank had wounded me deeply, it had also forced me to confront aspects of my life that I had neglected for too long. The journey, painful as it was becoming a path toward rediscovery, a chance to rebuild not just my itinerary back home, but the very essence of who I was. Despite the growing sense of renewal, the sting of betrayal remained a constant companion. There were nights when I would curl up on the back seat of my rented car in a parking lot, unable to sleep as I wrestled with conflicting emotions. I questioned the nature of trust and whether the foundation of my marriage could ever be restored after such an outrageous act. Each sleepless night was filled with memories of our shared laughter and dreams, juxtaposed against the bitter taste of abandonment. Yet, even in the midst of despair, I found that the journey had awakened something new, a desire to reclaim the parts of myself that had long been dormant. The turning point came unexpectedly one evening as I sat at a small roadside park, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a brilliant display of colors. In that moment, the beauty of the natural world stirred something deep within me. I realized that while I could not change the past, I had the power to shape my future. The betrayal was a scar, but it did not have to be the end of my story. I began to envision a life where I was defined not by the actions of another, but by my own resilience and determination to forge ahead. Emboldened by this new perspective, I reached out to a few acquaintances from work, informing them of my predicament. Their support, though tinged with disbelief at the audacity of the prank, reminded me that I was not entirely alone in my struggle. They offered practical advice and even arranged for a rental car that would take me further along my journey. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, served as a reminder that the human spirit is capable of rising above even the most crushing disappointments. With each passing day, I grew more determined to find my way back home. I documented every encounter, every small victory, in a journal that became a lifeline, a tangible record of my metamorphosis from a betrayed husband to a man who was learning to stand on his own. I started to see that the isolation was not a punishment but a chance to rebuild, to question old assumptions, and to rediscover passions and strengths that had long lain dormant beneath the surface of routine life. By the time I reached the outskirts of a bustling town that promised a direct route home, I realized that this journey had changed me fundamentally. The initial shock and humiliation had given way to a quiet resolve. I was no longer the man who had been left stranded by a cruel joke. I was someone who had faced the abyss of abandonment and emerged with a deeper understanding of my own worth. The road was still long, and the scars of betrayal were not easily erased, but I knew that the journey had sown the seeds of a new beginning, a life where trust would be rebuilt not on blind faith, but on the solid ground of self-reliance and newfound strength. After weeks on the road, having traversed winding highways and quiet byways, I finally found myself nearing the city where I had once called home. The landscape had changed dramatically since I left, and every mile traveled was a reminder of the events that had set this unexpected journey in motion. Yet, as I approached familiar territory, my heart was heavy with unresolved questions and a deep, gnawing need for answers. I knew that returning home meant facing not only the physical distance that separated me from the life I once knew, but also the emotional chasm that Karen's prank had created. The drive into the outskirts of my hometown was filled with conflicting emotions. Every familiar landmark, the old diner on Main Street, the park where we had once picnicked, evoked memories of happier times, now marred by the sting of abandonment. I parked my rental car by the main station, where I planned to catch the next bus home. As I sat on the cold metal bench under the station's dim lights, I tried to piece together my thoughts. The journey had taught me so much about resilience and self-reliance, yet the questions remained. Why would Karen, the woman I loved, orchestrate such a cruel prank? What unspoken truths lay behind her laughter and the taunts of her friends? And, most of all, could our marriage survive the betrayal and the hurt that had been so callously inflicted? I decided that before I could begin to heal, I needed to confront the source of the pain directly. Despite the deep-seated anger and the wounds that still throbbed with betrayal, I knew that the only way forward was through honest communication. I took out my phone and sent a message to Karen, requesting a face-to-face meeting as soon as possible. I did not know how she would respond, but the need for clarity outweighed my fear of what might come next. The waiting was agonizing. Every minute stretched out, filled with a mixture of dread and a desperate hope for understanding. Finally, late in the afternoon, Karen agreed to meet at our favorite cafe, a neutral space that once served as the backdrop for our shared laughter and quiet conversations. As I walked into the familiar setting, my heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and sorrow. I scanned the room, searching for her familiar face, and there she was, sitting by a window, her expression a complex tapestry of regret, defiance, and uncertainty. The conversation began tentatively. Karen explained that the prank had been a spontaneous, misguided attempt at humor, a joke that spiraled out of control, driven by peer pressure and a need to inject excitement into her seemingly mundane routine. She admitted that she had never truly anticipated the emotional fallout, and that, in the moment, it had all seemed like harmless fun. But as I listened, I sensed that there were deeper layers to her words, a mixture of guilt and a longing for the past that she had not fully confronted. Her confession was both painful and illuminating. I learned that behind her carefree laughter lay a complex web of insecurities and unspoken desires. The prank, she admitted, was a desperate cry for attention, a misguided effort to feel alive and relevant in a life that had become all too predictable. As she spoke, I felt the weight of my own hurt, the sting of abandonment that had left me stranded in a state both literal and emotional. Every word was a reminder that the betrayal was not just an act of cruelty, but a symptom of deeper issues in our relationship, issues we had never fully addressed. The cafe, once a symbol of our shared warmth, became a stage for a painful reckoning. We spoke for hours, our conversation oscillating between raw emotion and tentative attempts at understanding. I demanded to know why she would choose to hurt me so deeply, and she tearfully admitted that part of her discontent stemmed from feelings of entrapment, a longing for the freedom and unpredictability of her youth. I listened, my heart torn between the love I still felt and the betrayal that had shattered that love. The conversation left me with more questions than answers, yet it was the first step toward facing the unspoken truths that had haunted our marriage. As dusk settled over the city, our meeting ended with no clear resolution, only a fragile truce forged in the shared pain of our mistakes. I returned to the bus station, my mind heavy with memories and uncertainties. The journey that had begun with a cruel prank had forced me to confront the depths of my own vulnerability, to question the very nature of trust and commitment. I realized that the road to healing would be long and winding, requiring both of us to face our inner demons and rebuild the bonds that had been so callously severed. Sitting alone in the fading light, I understood that true reconciliation would demand more than apologies and promises. It would require a willingness to confront the painful past and embrace a future defined by honesty and mutual respect. Though the wounds of betrayal would not heal overnight, I clung to the hope that this confrontation was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the scars of the past could eventually serve as a reminder of resilience and growth rather than a symbol of irrevocable loss. The days that followed our long, painful meeting were filled with introspection and tentative steps toward rebuilding a life that had been shattered by cruelty and neglect. I returned home with a heavy heart and a mind swirling with conflicted emotions, a cocktail of lingering hurt, cautious hope, and the burning desire for renewal. The journey that had taken me across state lines and through the depths of isolation had also taught me something invaluable. Even in the face of profound betrayal, there is the possibility for growth and redemption. Back in my hometown, every familiar sight and sound stirred memories of a life that now seemed fragile. The streets, the parks, the simple comforts of my old routine all carried echoes of what I had once known and lost. Yet, with each passing day, I began to rediscover fragments of my identity that had lain dormant under the weight of our shared past. I took long walks alone, allowing the rhythm of my footsteps to guide my thoughts as I slowly pieced together a vision of the future that was uniquely my own. I started by reconnecting with old friends and acquaintances who had offered their support during my time on the road. Their kindness was a balm to my wounded pride, and each conversation reaffirmed that I was not defined solely by the betrayal I had endured. In the quiet moments of reflection, I realized that while Karen's cruel prank had left a gaping wound in our marriage, it had also forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities and embrace the possibility of change. Determined to reclaim control over my life, I enrolled in a local community course, a workshop on personal growth and resilience. There, I met others who had experienced loss, betrayal, and the bitter taste of abandonment. In their stories, I found solace and a shared understanding of the human capacity to endure and overcome even the harshest trials. Each session was a step toward healing, a gradual process of letting go of the bitterness and welcoming the light of renewal. Meanwhile, Karen and I embarked on a difficult journey of reconciliation. We agreed to attend couples counseling, a process that required us to lay bare our deepest wounds and confront the unspoken grievances that had festered for far too long. In those sessions, we spoke openly about our failures, our unmet needs, and the disillusionment that had driven Karen to orchestrate the prank that had changed everything. The truth, painful as it was, became the foundation for rebuilding a more honest, resilient relationship. We learned to set boundaries, to express our desires without fear of judgment, and to work together toward a future where trust could be slowly restored. There were many days when the path forward seemed impossible, a time when every memory of the betrayal threatened to pull us back into despair. Yet, in the midst of that darkness, we discovered small moments of grace. A shared smile over a simple meal, a quiet conversation about our hopes for the future, and the gradual return of laughter that had once defined our home all became symbols of a new beginning. Slowly, the old wounds began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism that promised redemption. I realized that the journey to renewal was not about forgetting the past. It was about integrating the lessons learned into a more authentic, compassionate version of ourselves. The betrayal, as deep and painful as it had been, forced us both to confront the realities of our relationship and to grow in ways we never imagined possible. While the scars of that fateful prank would always remain, they no longer defined us. Instead, they became a testament to the strength of the human spirit, the capacity to rise, rebuild, and embrace a future that, though uncertain, held the promise of true transformation. In the final weeks of that long, arduous journey, I stood at the threshold of a new life. I had returned home not as the man who had been abandoned and broken, but as someone who had been tempered by adversity and reborn through self-discovery. I looked at Karen with eyes that saw not only the betrayal of the past, but also the potential for a future built on mutual growth and understanding. Though our marriage would never be the same as it once was, we had forged something stronger from the crucible of our pain, a commitment to face life's challenges together with honesty and compassion. As I pen these final words, I know that the road ahead will continue to test us. There will be moments of doubt and days when the shadows of the past threaten to resurface. But I also know that every step we take toward renewal is a victory over the cruelty of that fateful prank. a victory that reaffirms the power of resilience and the indomitable will to rebuild. With cautious hope and a steadfast heart, I move forward into a future where the pain of betrayal has given way to the promise of redemption.